Mark Thompson had always considered himself lucky to live in a peaceful suburban neighborhood. His house was nothing extravagant, but it had everything he needed: a cozy living room, a small garden bursting with colorful flowers, and most importantly, a beautiful backyard pool. That pool wasn't just a luxury, it was his happy place. After long days at work, Mark would sit by the water's edge, sipping lemonade as the sun dipped below the horizon. On weekends, he'd invite friends over for barbecues, laughter echoing across the yard while kids splashed around in the cool water. Life felt simple, predictable, and good. But little did Mark know, trouble was brewing right under his nose, or rather, across the street. Karen Miller, a woman who seemed to thrive on enforcing rules, had recently taken charge of the Homeowners Association, HOA. She was known throughout the neighborhood for her sharp tongue, clipboard always in hand, and an uncanny ability to sniff out even the tiniest infractions. Whether it was someone leaving their trash cans too close to the curb or planting flowers that didn't match the HOA-approved color palette, Karen made sure everyone knew they were being watched. Some neighbors found her annoying, others outright unbearable, but no one dared challenge her authority, except Mark. One sunny afternoon, Mark decided to take advantage of the warm weather and spend some time relaxing by his pool. He grabbed a book, stretched out on a lounge chair, and let the sound of trickling water soothe him. Just as he started getting lost in the pages, he heard footsteps crunching against the gravel path leading to his backyard. Looking up, he saw Karen marching toward him, flanked by two strangers who looked like they belonged in a catalog for overly formal dinner parties. They were clearly guests, probably here for one of Karen's infamous HOA meetings where she preached about neighborhood harmony and property values. "Mark," Karen said sharply, cutting through the tranquility like a knife. Her tone left no room for pleasantries. "You're in violation of HOA guidelines." Mark blinked momentarily, confused. "What are you talking about? What guideline?" Karen pointed dramatically toward his driveway, where a couple of cars belonging to his friends were parked. "Guest parking is strictly prohibited near communal spaces. You've disrupted the flow of traffic, and frankly, it's unacceptable." Mark stared at her, dumbfounded. The so-called communal space she referred to was a tiny strip of grass between his driveway and the sidewalk. It wasn't exactly Grand Central Station. Still, he tried to keep his voice calm. "Karen, these are my guests. My driveway is part of my property. I'm not breaking any rules." Karen crossed her arms, her lips curling into a smug smile. "Actually, according to Section 4, subsection C of the HOA handbook, you are. And since you seem incapable of following basic regulations, I suggest you leave your own pool area immediately." Mark couldn't believe what he was hearing. Leave his own backyard? Because of a minor technicality? He glanced at the two guests, standing behind Karen, both looking increasingly uncomfortable. One of them shifted awkwardly, avoiding eye contact, while the other gave Mark an apologetic shrug. Clearly, this wasn't their idea of a fun afternoon either. For a moment, Mark considered arguing further, but then he realized something. Karen wasn't interested in reason or compromise. This wasn't about rules. It was about control. So, instead of fighting back, he stood up slowly, closed his book, and smiled politely. "Fine, Karen, if you insist, I'll go inside. Enjoy the rest of your tour." As he walked away, he could hear Karen explaining to her guests why Mark's behavior was so problematic. Her voice carried over the fence, dripping with condescension. Mark shook his head, shutting the sliding glass door behind him. Little did Karen know this wouldn't be the end of their disagreement. It was only the beginning. Over the next few days, Mark replayed the incident in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's actions weren't just petty, they were personal. Sure, she nitpicked everyone in the neighborhood, but there was something about the way she singled him out that felt different. Was it because he hadn't attended one of her HOA meetings? Or maybe it was because his pool parties drew bigger crowds than her stuffy gatherings. Whatever the reason, Mark knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let Karen ruin his enjoyment of his home. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. Not just at Karen, but at the entire system she represented. Why should someone, like her, have so much power over how people live their lives? Who gave her the right to dictate what was acceptable and what wasn't? These questions swirled in Mark's mind as he sat by his now empty lounge chair, staring at the shimmering surface of his pool. And as he gazed at the water, an idea began to form, one that would turn the tables on Karen in a way she'd never see coming. Little did Mark realize, this single act of defiance would set off a chain reaction that would ripple through the entire neighborhood, forcing everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about power, community, and the lengths people will go to protect what matters most to them. The days following Karen's intrusion into Mark's backyard only deepened the tension between them. If anything, her behavior became even more aggressive. It was as though she had taken his calm response to her demands as a sign of weakness, and now she was determined to assert her dominance over him. Letters began arriving at Mark's doorstep almost daily, each one filled with accusations about some new violation he hadn't even known existed. The first letter complained about the color of his mailbox. It was beige instead of white, which apparently clashed with the HOA's vision of aesthetic perfection. The second criticized the placement of his potted plants near the driveway, claiming they obstructed visibility for pedestrians. By the third letter, Karen had somehow found fault with the volume of his outdoor speakers during weekend gatherings. At first, Mark tried to play along. He figured if he addressed each issue promptly, Karen might eventually lose interest and move on to tormenting someone else. So he painted his mailbox white, rearranged his plants, and turned down the music at his next barbecue. But no matter how compliant he was, it never seemed to satisfy her. Instead, her complaints grew increasingly absurd. One day she accused him of watering his lawn too early in the morning, claiming the noise disturbed the neighborhood's peaceful ambiance. Another time, she sent him a strongly worded email about the type of bird feeder hanging from his oak tree, insisting it attracted undesirable wildlife. Mark couldn't help but laugh at some of the accusations, though frustration simmered just beneath the surface. He started keeping copies of all the letters, partly out of disbelief, and partly because he felt like documenting the madness might come in handy someday. Still, he tried to keep things civil. Whenever Karen approached him in person, which happened more often than he cared for, he remained polite, even when her tone bordered on condescending. "Mark," she said one evening as he was mowing his front yard, "I've noticed your grass is slightly longer than the recommended 2 inches. You really should trim it before our next HOA meeting. First impressions matter, you know." He stopped the mower and wiped his brow, giving her a tight smile. "Karen, I'll make sure to cut it tomorrow. Thanks for letting me know." Her lips curled into what might have been mistaken for a smile if it weren't for the glint of superiority in her eyes. "Good. I'm glad we're on the same page." But behind closed doors, Mark's patience was wearing thin. Each new complaint felt less like an attempt to maintain order and more like an attack on his way of life. And then came the final straw: Karen's obsession with his pool. At first, her grievances were minor. She claimed the chlorine smell drifted into neighboring yards or that the sound of children laughing during swim sessions disrupted the serenity of the street. But soon, her criticisms escalated. She argued that the maintenance schedule for his pool pump created unnecessary noise. She even suggested the pool itself was an eyesore because its shimmering blue surface reflected sunlight in a way that could distract drivers. It all culminated in a particularly heated HOA meeting held in Karen's immaculate living room. Mark didn't usually attend these gatherings. Most of the discussions revolved around topics like fence colors or holiday decorations. But this time, curiosity got the better of him. As he walked in, he noticed several neighbors exchanging uneasy glances. Clearly, everyone knew what was coming. Sure enough, once the meeting began, Karen wasted no time bringing up Mark. Standing in front of the group with her clipboard clutched tightly in her hands, she launched into a tirade about his supposed disregard for community standards. "Mark's behavior has become increasingly disruptive," she announced, her voice dripping with authority. "His refusal to adhere to basic guidelines threatens the harmony of our neighborhood. Something must be done." Mark sat quietly, listening to her words without interrupting. When she finally paused for breath, he raised his hand. "Karen, can I say something?" She hesitated, clearly caught off guard by his composure. "Go ahead." "Thank you," he said calmly. "First, I want to point out that I've addressed every single issue you've raised so far. I've painted my mailbox, moved my plants, lowered the volume of my music, all of it. Yet here we are again, discussing another set of complaints. At what point does this stop being about rules and start becoming personal?" The room fell silent. Some neighbors nodded in agreement while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Karen, however, wasn't fazed. She straightened her posture and shot back, "This isn't personal, Mark. This is about maintaining property values and ensuring the neighborhood remains attractive to potential buyers." Mark leaned forward, his expression unwavering. "And yet, none of the issues you've brought up actually affect property values. They're minor inconveniences at best. Meanwhile, you're turning this community into a place where people feel like they're walking on eggshells, afraid to step out of line." Karen's face flushed red. Whether from anger or embarrassment, it was hard to tell. Before she could respond, another neighbor chimed in, attempting to diffuse the situation. "Let's focus on finding solutions rather than assigning blame," the man said diplomatically. Mark appreciated the sentiment, but he knew Karen wouldn't let this go easily. As the meeting dragged on, she doubled down, proposing a motion to fine Mark unless he agreed to stricter regulations regarding his pool usage. The vote passed narrowly, thanks largely to Karen's influence over the group. When the meeting ended, Mark left feeling both defeated and furious. He realized that reasoning with Karen was futile. She wasn't interested in compromise or fairness. She wanted control, plain and simple. That night, as Mark sat by his empty lounge chair staring at the pool, he made a decision. He wasn't going to let Karen dictate how he lived his life anymore. More importantly, he wasn't going to let her win, not without putting up a fight. An idea began forming in his mind, one that would take her obsession with rules and turn it against her. For the first time since this ordeal began, Mark smiled. Tomorrow, he thought, would be a day Karen, and the entire neighborhood, would never forget. The idea that had been simmering in Mark's mind all night finally took shape by morning. It was bold, a little outrageous, and undeniably symbolic. Mark knew he couldn't fight Karen on her terms. She thrived on rules, complaints, and bureaucracy. But what if he flipped the script? What if, instead of resisting her demands, he gave her exactly what she wanted, in a way that would expose the absurdity of her behavior? The thought made him grin as he sipped his coffee, watching the sunlight glint off the surface of his pool. By mid-morning, Mark had rented an industrial pump from a local equipment store. He also bought a few extra supplies, a signboard, some stakes, and a roll of brightly colored duct tape. As he set up the pump near the edge of the pool, he caught sight of Karen across the street, standing on her porch with a cup of tea. She glanced over, curiosity flickering across her face, but quickly turned away when she saw him wave cheerfully. Little did she know her day was about to get far more eventful. Saturday arrived, bright and sunny, the perfect day for Karen's latest neighborhood tour. She had invited a group of potential new residents to see the community, touting its pristine beauty and strict adherence to HOA standards. Dressed in her signature pastel blazer and carrying her clipboard, she led the small group down the sidewalk, pointing out manicured lawns and freshly painted mailboxes. Everything seemed to be going according to plan until they rounded the corner onto Mark Street. That's when they saw it. Water gushing out of Mark's pool like a miniature waterfall, flowing into the drainage system along the side of his yard. Neighbors began to gather, drawn by the unusual sight. Some whispered among themselves, while others snapped photos with their phones. A crowd quickly formed, and soon everyone was talking about the spectacle unfolding before them. Karen froze mid-sentence, her mouth hanging open as she stared at the scene. Her guests exchanged puzzled looks, clearly unsure how to react. One of them finally broke the silence. Is that allowed?" Karen's cheeks flushed red, and she hurried toward Mark's yard, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. "Mark," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "What on earth do you think you're doing?" Mark looked, Up from adjusting the pump, his expression perfectly calm. "Oh, hi, Karen, nice to see you again." "Don't give me that," she snapped, stepping closer. "You're draining your pool? In front of everyone?" "This is completely unacceptable." He shrugged, feigning innocence. "Well, you've made it pretty clear that my pool is a problem. You didn't like the chlorine smell, the noise from the pump, or the reflection of sunlight. So I figured the best solution was to remove the source of all those issues entirely. Problem solved, right?" Her jaw tightened, and she gripped her clipboard so hard her knuckles turned white. "This isn't solving anything. This is vandalism. You're ruining your property and embarrassing yourself in front of these fine people." Mark raised an eyebrow, gesturing toward the growing crowd. "Embarrassing myself? Or embarrassing you? Seems like everyone here is pretty interested in seeing how this plays out." Karen glanced around nervously, noticing the amused expressions on her guests' faces. One man was filming the scene with his phone, while another woman whispered something to her companion, both trying and failing to stifle laughter. Karen's carefully constructed image of authority was crumbling right before her eyes. Desperate to regain control, she turned back to Mark. "You can't just drain your pool without permission. There are regulations about this kind of thing." Mark tilted his head, pretending to consider her words. Regulations, you say? Funny. I thought you were the expert on those. Maybe you should check your HOA handbook and let me know which section I'm violating now." She sputtered, unable to come up with a coherent response. Meanwhile, Mark continued working, attaching a makeshift sign to the fence surrounding his pool area. Written in bold letters were the words, "Pool removed by popular demand, thanks Karen." Below it, he added smaller text, "Ask Karen about our neighborhood's commitment to fun." The sign drew even more attention, eliciting chuckles from the onlookers. Even some of Karen's loyal supporters couldn't suppress grins. One neighbor shouted jokingly, "Hey, Karen, maybe we should all start draining our pools too. Think of the harmony." Karen shot him a glare but said nothing. Instead, she turned back to Mark, her voice trembling with frustration. "You're making a mockery of this neighborhood. People won't want to live here if you keep behaving like this." Mark leaned casually against the pump, crossing his arms. "Funny, I thought people moved here because of the friendly community and beautiful homes, not because of someone enforcing arbitrary rules. But hey, if my empty pool helps sell houses, who am I to argue?" The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Karen's attempt to showcase the neighborhood's charm had backfired spectacularly. Instead of highlighting perfection, she'd inadvertently revealed the pettiness and dysfunction lurking beneath the surface. By the time the water level in the pool dropped significantly, the crowd had grown larger, and social media posts about the incident were already spreading like wildfire. As the afternoon wore on, Karen retreated indoors, humiliated and defeated. Her guests followed shortly after, offering awkward apologies about needing to leave early. Mark, on the other hand, stayed outside, chatting with neighbors and answering questions about his impromptu project. Many expressed admiration for his creativity and courage, while others confessed they'd secretly felt suffocated by Karen's rigid enforcement of the rules. Though the pool was nearly empty by sunset, the impact of Mark's actions rippled far beyond his backyard. For the first time in years, people in the neighborhood started questioning whether Karen's version of harmony was worth the cost. And as Mark packed up the pump and surveyed the drained pool, he felt a sense of satisfaction, not because he'd won, but because he'd sparked a conversation that couldn't be ignored. The sight of Mark's drained pool became the talk of the neighborhood, and not just locally. Within hours, photos and videos of the spectacle had gone viral on social media. Neighbors who hadn't been present during the event were bombarded, with messages from friends and family asking if they'd heard about the guy who drained his pool to spite Karen. Local news outlets picked up the story, dubbing Karen HOA Karen in headlines that spread like wildfire. Memes popped up everywhere, poking fun at her rigid enforcement of trivial rules and Mark's audacious response. One popular meme featured a cartoon version of Karen holding her clipboard next to an empty pool with the caption, "When bureaucracy meets backyard rebellion." For Karen, the fallout was immediate and humiliating. What had started as a routine Saturday tour designed to showcase the neighborhood's charm had turned into a public relations disaster. Her carefully curated image as the guardian of order and aesthetics was shattered. People began questioning whether her obsession with rules actually improved the community or simply stifled individuality and joy. Even some of her staunchest supporters started distancing themselves, quietly admitting that Karen might have taken things too far this time. Mark, on the other hand, became something of a local hero. Neighbors who had previously avoided confrontation with Karen now approached him with admiration and gratitude. At first, Mark wasn't sure how to handle the sudden attention. He hadn't intended for his act to become a movement. It was meant to be a personal statement, a way to reclaim his autonomy without backing down. But as more people shared their frustrations with Karen's leadership, Mark realized his actions had struck a chord deeper than he'd anticipated. One evening, after the initial buzz had settled, Mark hosted an impromptu gathering in his backyard. Dozens of neighbors showed up, bringing snacks, drinks, and lawn chairs. They sat around the empty pool, laughing and sharing stories about run-ins with Karen over the years. One woman recounted how Karen had once fined her for hanging laundry outside because it supposedly detracted from curb appeal. Another neighbor joked about receiving a letter demanding he repaint his front door after Karen deemed the shade of blue too bold. As the night went on, the conversation shifted from complaints to ideas. People began discussing ways to create a better balance between maintaining neighborhood standards and allowing residents to express themselves freely. Someone suggested forming a committee to review the HOA guidelines, ensuring they remained fair and reasonable. Others proposed hosting regular community events to foster camaraderie rather than division. Karen watched all of this unfold from her window, seething with frustration but powerless to stop it. She tried to rally her allies, sending out emails reminding everyone of the importance of structure and discipline, but her words fell flat. The tide had turned against her, and she knew it. For the first time in years, Karen felt isolated, even within her own home. Despite the growing tension, Mark made a conscious effort not to gloat. While part of him relished seeing Karen get her comeuppance, he understood that true change wouldn't come from alienating her further. Instead, he focused on using the moment to spark meaningful dialogue. When a reporter contacted him for an interview, Mark emphasized that his goal wasn't to vilify Karen, but to highlight the need for compassion and flexibility in community governance. "We're all neighbors," he told the reporter, leaning against the edge of his empty pool, "and while rules are important, so is understanding. Nobody wants to live in a place where fear of fines outweighs the freedom to enjoy life. I hope this situation encourages us to find common ground and build a community we can all be proud of." His words resonated widely, earning praise from both locals and outsiders following the story online. Some commenters called Mark a modern-day Robin Hood, fighting back against unnecessary authority. Others praised him for standing up to bullying behavior in a creative and nonviolent way. Even those who initially sided with Karen admitted that Mark's approach had opened their eyes to the broader issues at play. Meanwhile, Karen struggled to salvage her reputation. She attended the next HOA meeting bracing for backlash, and she wasn't disappointed. Several members voiced concerns about the direction of the association under her leadership, citing Mark's pool incident as evidence that the current system needed reform. Others pointed out that the negative publicity surrounding the neighborhood could deter potential buyers, undermining one of Karen's key arguments for strict enforcement. To her credit, Karen didn't lash out or storm out of the meeting. Instead, she listened quietly, her usual confidence replaced by visible discomfort. When it was her turn to speak, she surprised everyone by acknowledging, at least partially, that mistakes had been made. "I may have overstepped in certain areas," she admitted reluctantly, avoiding eye contact with Mark. "Perhaps there's room for adjustments." Though her apology lacked sincerity, it marked a turning point. The HOA agreed to form a task force to review existing policies, inviting input from all residents, including Mark. For the first time in years, decisions would be made collaboratively rather than dictated by one person's vision of perfection. As weeks passed, the drained pool remained empty, serving as a constant reminder of the standoff. Some neighbors, offered to help Mark refill it, but he declined, explaining that he wanted to wait until the dust settled before making any decisions. "It's not just a pool anymore," he said with a wry smile. "It's a symbol of what happens when people stand up for themselves and each other." While the neighborhood still had work to do, the mood had shifted noticeably. Conversations became less guarded, laughter echoed through the streets more often, and even Karen seemed to soften slightly. Though she continued attending HOA meetings, her tone lost its sharp edge, replaced by a hesitant willingness to listen. For Mark, the ordeal reinforced an important lesson. Standing up for oneself isn't always easy, but it can inspire others to do the same. And sometimes, finding common ground requires stepping outside the boundaries of what feels safe, or filling an empty pool with fresh possibilities. Weeks turned into months, and the neighborhood slowly began to heal from the turmoil that had once divided it. Mark's drained pool remained a focal point, a quiet yet powerful symbol of resilience and change. But life in the community started, returning to normal. The task force formed by the HOA worked diligently to review outdated policies, holding open forums where residents could voice their concerns and suggestions. For the first time, people felt heard. Rules about mailbox colors and lawn ornaments were relaxed, while new initiatives focused on fostering connections among neighbors took center stage. Karen, though still present at meetings, adopted a markedly different approach. She no longer wielded her clipboard like a weapon, but instead listened intently, occasionally nodding or jotting down notes. Her transformation wasn't overnight. There were moments when old habits crept back in, such as when she insisted on debating the placement of holiday decorations. But overall, she seemed genuinely committed to change. Whether this shift came from genuine remorse or a desire to salvage her reputation was unclear. But what mattered most was the positive impact it had on the community. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Karen approached Mark during one of his evening walks. He hadn't seen her coming and nearly stumbled over his own feet when he noticed her standing there, hands clasped tightly together. It was unusual for her to initiate conversation without an agenda, so Mark braced himself for whatever might come next. "Mark," she began hesitantly, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it before. "Can we talk for a moment?" He nodded, curious but cautious. "Sure, Karen. What's on your mind?" She glanced around briefly as if gathering her thoughts, then met his gaze. "I wanted to apologize for everything. I realize now that I let my need for control get the better of me. And I know I crossed lines I shouldn't have." Mark blinked, taken aback by her candor. "That's unexpected. But okay. Thank you for saying that." Karen sighed, visibly relieved. "I mean it. You were right. I was so focused on enforcing rules that I forgot why we even have them. To make this a place people want to live. Instead, I think I made it harder for everyone, including myself." Her words struck a chord with Mark. While he'd been angry with her in the past, he recognized that Karen wasn't inherently malicious. Like many people, she had simply gotten caught up in trying to maintain order, losing sight of the bigger picture along the way. He softened his tone. "We all make mistakes, Karen. The important thing is learning from them. And I think you're doing that." She managed a small smile, though it faltered slightly. "Still, I owe you more than just an apology. Your pool, it was wrong of me to push you into draining it. If you'd like, I'll drop all the pending fines against you, and maybe we can figure out a way to fix this together." Mark tilted his head, intrigued. "Fix it? What do you mean?" Karen gestured toward his backyard. "Refill the pool if you want to. Let me help cover the costs. It doesn't have to be permanent. If you decide later you don't want it anymore, that's fine, but right now it feels like a wound in the neighborhood, a reminder of how things went wrong. Maybe filling it will show everyone that we're moving forward." For a long moment, Mark considered her offer. Part of him wanted to refuse outright, letting the empty pool remain as a lasting testament to his defiance. But another part of him understood the value of closure. not just for himself but for the entire community. Refilling the pool wouldn't erase what had happened, but it could signal a fresh start. "All right," he said finally, extending his hand. "Let's do it. But on one condition, no more nitpicking about the noise or the chlorine smell, okay?" Karen laughed nervously, shaking his hand. "Deal. No more complaints. I promise." True to her word, Karen followed through on her offer. With financial assistance from the HOA, and perhaps a bit of personal guilt money, Mark hired professionals to inspect and repair the pool before refilling it. Neighbors pitched in too, helping clean the area and decorate the perimeter with potted plants and string lights. When the water finally returned, shimmering under the sunlight, it felt like a collective victory, a celebration of unity rather than division. The first post-refill gathering was a modest affair, with Mark inviting close friends and neighbors over for a casual barbecue. Children splashed in the shallow end while adults lounged nearby, chatting and laughing. Even Karen attended, bringing a plate of homemade cookies as a peace offering. Though awkward at first, she eventually joined in the festivities, sharing stories and jokes with people she'd once alienated. By the end of the night, someone snapped a photo of the group gathered around the pool, capturing smiles that hadn't been seen in years. As weeks passed, the neighborhood continued to evolve. Regular block parties replaced formal HOA meetings, giving residents a chance to connect without agendas or arguments. Newcomers moved in, drawn not just by the beautiful homes but also by the sense of warmth and inclusivity they found. Karen, for her part, stepped down as head of the HOA, passing the torch to a younger couple eager to lead with empathy and collaboration. For Mark, the experience left a lasting impression. He learned that standing up for oneself isn't just about winning. It's about sparking conversations and inspiring others to reflect on their actions. At the same time, he discovered the power of forgiveness and compromise. By choosing to refill the pool, he didn't erase the past but built a bridge toward a brighter future. And so, life in the neighborhood carried on, shaped by lessons learned and bonds strengthened. The pool, once a source of conflict, became a symbol of renewal, a reminder that even the deepest divides can be bridged with understanding, patience, and a willingness to meet halfway. As Mark sat by the water one evening, watching fireflies dance above the surface, he felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for his home but for the community that had grown stronger because of it.